speakers. First, the first speaker will be Eckhard Arnold, who is from the Berlin Academy of Sciences, who is the head of the Digital Humanities Department, formerly IT Department, but now Digital Humanities Research and Development. And as you can see, I'm looking for information about you. I cannot say. No, I'll introduce you, of course. Yeah. He's involved in many different projects in digital humanities that are so-called academic projects, so it's long-running projects with do not deal only with research questions, but also with very, very basic questions on data and data processing, like, for example, developing ontologies, developing certain encodings in digital editions and so on. I think one of the project that is mentioned in right now is edition of Schelling in München, a kind of hybrid edition that is, I think, an actual project that is running right now. That is just one of many projects. Basically involved in any academic project involves somehow data management, data manipulation, digital or any digital methods or computational methods. But I would like to point out that you're not only an expert on the digital and whatever that could be in very general, but you actually have studied philosophy and also published and taught in philosophy, and you have a specialization basically on simulations, I think, and computer simulation also from a philosophical point of view. And you've also published on these things. Not lately, I think, but because you're now the head of the department for
2019 was my last.
Yeah, I think you head of the department now for 10, 11 years, something like that, probably.
Yeah, roughly 10 years now.
Okay, roughly 10 years. So that's the Eckhard Arnold, who I'd like to introduce to you here very shortly. And the other discussant is Tomáš Svoboda, which I also welcome to our branch office here. Tomáš Svoboda is the head of the Institute for Translatology here in Prague. He has a very long list of publications, and has also worked as a translator in the field, I would say. I don't want to just list all of your many publications, but maybe point out one that's, I think, your PhD thesis, because it connects quite well to the panel that we had beforehand, and it's a thesis on the norms of norms in the Baroque of translation, and especially with regard to the Czech-German context. I hope I explained it sufficiently. And apart from that, you have a lot of other publications, but I want to point out one article that also, I think, gave an impulse to this discussion, and this is one of the things that Eckhard has read of you, and you have read some hypotheses of Eckhard, and this article is called "No Translation Barriers Ahead," I think, or "No Language Barriers Ahead." I'm sorry. And this is an article that deals with machine translation. It's from 2017, I think, and it asks what machine translation actually does. So what is actually the quality of the things that are translated, and what might be the dangers of these translated text. I won't go too much into detail because we'll recur to that maybe later on. So without any further ado, I'm glad that you're here, and I would say that Eckhard, you will start with your short statement.
Well, basically, I'm very optimistic at the moment about translation technology and what you can do with it, and I think it can really change our scientific world in a very important way. At the moment, or let's say until recently, the scientific world was the world of English language. Sooner or later, any young scientist learn if you want to be read and if you want people to take notice of what you write, you have to write in English. That's at least true for many fields. It's certainly true for analytical philosophy, where I was doing a lot of work. And writing in English, of course, means that it takes more time if it's not your mother's language, and it's harder to get through the review than a native speaker, and all this is also empirically assessed. This is true. And these are disadvantages. Also, there's a pragmatic advantage. Everybody can understand everybody else. But there's also another problem with this only English science world, is that there's still a lot of material that is not published in English, but in national languages, and this is not read. It falls flat in a shadow of, well, disregard and not properly being read, and this is a problem. And I think 10 years or 5 years ago, I would have said, okay, these are disadvantages, but the pragmatic advantage of having one scientific world language and everybody being able to talk with everybody else is so great that it's fine if you all have to talk in English. But now I think there could be a better world because there's cheap translation technology. And I think with this cheap translation technology, cheap and reliable, both is needed, you can, first of all, easily read what people have written in languages, yet that you don't understand or don't understand well. You just put it into DeepL or Google Translator, and you get a reasonably good translation. We've just seen examples for historical text where it didn't work. But I would say for contemporary work, and especially for scientific secondary literature, it works extremely well. And I've made the experiences in the fields I work. So you are able now to read the literature in other languages. And I also think, given that this is the case, there's no excuse not to take notice of literature of languages just because you don't know the language or just because it's not English. And on the other hand, if you want to publish yourself, you now have the option to write your paper in your mother's language, which is much easier than English, at least for me, because I'm not so good at languages, but generally it's easier. And then you translate it, and then you just revise the translation. And you're much faster, and then you can have a paper in your well, natural language and in English, and people can read it all over the world. Basically, you can be read. And I also made the experiences because I published a few old papers that I'd only written in German, which I later regretted. That was before I really went into English. And I've now translated them into English and actually got some email and reactions from people from other parts of the world, not from America, but from South America, interestingly, who were now able to read it because they had an English version there. So this is, I think, the world we are moving to, and I think we are almost there. And I think that the translation technology is so good that for this purpose we can use it. And I think in the longer future, we might also be used for translating historical sources, but I don't want to go so much into the details. But this is what today I think is important. And I think I leave it as it now. No, one thing I'd like to say, because regarding the business of translators, well, probably everybody would say, well, with these machines, sooner or later, we don't need translators anymore. However, I believe, at least for a couple of years, translators will still be needed for the high quality products. And if the world moves into the kind of future that I was just describing, a future where we not write and speak and read only English, but where we deal with different scientific languages, this will be a culture of different languages, and it will be a culture of translating. And there will be much more need for translations. And also translators are not needed anymore because you have these machines. You still need many more translators because it's generally more common to translate things, and you need people who do the quality assurance. And I couldn't tell which effect is stronger. The one effect that they're not needed because there's DeepL or not needed that urgently anymore, or the other effect because we are translating more and more material on a regular basis because we are getting used to publishing our own material in several languages. We need more people who help us with these translations and weed out the problems that DeepL and Google Translator still leave us. So that's about it. And later I'm also going to say a little bit about your paper. I have some questions, but this is my statement first of all.
Thank you very much, Eckhard, so far. And if you want, I will open the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to start with saying it's a genuine pleasure to be here and to be able to contribute to the discussion. I'm looking very much forward to we can and will be sharing. To make a statement about the expectations and the consequences of machine translation, let me start just by making clear the terminology I'll be using when referring to machine translation, I'll probably use the term traditional machine translation engines, which is, for example, DeepL today or Google Translate. As you know, these solutions use the neural networks, and by that definition, we could define them as AI already. So there has been AI around for several years now, and it's now well developed. Whereas with ChatGPT and other platforms that use AI made available and accessible through those chat-like platforms and solutions, I'll be using the generative AI term. So just to distinguish DeepL versus ChatGPT, it's not the same thing. Both, in my opinion, is AI, but I like to refer to ChatGPT as generative AI to make sure. So the panel is entitled Expectations and Consequences of Automated Language Processing. So I'd like to say that as for the expectations, I think generally in the society, there's very much the expectation that the linguistic barriers will have been made away with within what? A year, half a year, 5 years. There has been a discourse, so to say. I tend to call it the 5 years discourse, meaning we've seen over those 15 years now, perhaps, people, representatives of software company solutions saying the translation industry will be taken over by machines in 5 years. That has been here for 15 years or so. We're not there yet. And I have just read yet another article saying there's 5 more years to go for translators, and that's it. So the 5-year discourse continues, and translators will be here in 5 years and beyond, I'm sure. I'm rock solid, I'm sure about that. So in the general public, there's this hype about AI, about generative AI. And there's the understanding that you can get translations in real time, rather cheap, and of reasonable quality. I think it works as long as you'd refer to some simple, straightforward texts written or authored in English. So translating those texts into a large or a world language, a language with vast diffusion, such as German, for example, or French or Spanish. There's a problem when you'd like to switch to languages with lesser diffusion, and we've been covering that in the previous debate. So I'd call this expectation a hype, and the same goes for the generative AI with ChatGPT. Everybody is experimenting with it, and everybody's so amazed about how well it works, or seemingly well it works. But if you get into the details of it, and if you happen to be a professional, if you happen to use the tools on a regular basis, and perhaps with other languages than the large ones, you'll see that it comes with distinct problems, distinct challenges, especially in texts where they are not so easy to grasp, texts that are difficult to interpret. So I tend to say those machines really struggle when you need to interpret the message, which is between the lines. When the statement is crystal clear and you just read it, you understand it firsthand, then the machine will do quite a good job. Whereas if you need to interpret that, and we're in the area of human sciences, that's typically the case, then it really, you will see it fails on a number of occasions, not only once per page, several times per page. So that was the general picture. In translation studies, where I work now, where that's the field of my interest, we don't fear, or the translation studies community doesn't fear the developments. I'd say we're eager to see the developments. We're eager to take on board the new developments. We're eager to, it would be great to have high, well-performing machines to assist us. And the future would be that you would have the data curators, you would have the QA specialists, you would have the experts who will say what engine to use for what purpose, and that will be great. We're not there yet. So for translation studies, also for studying translation history, etc., it would be great to have a well-performing tool covering many languages. We're not there yet. What translation studies typically would invite or would love to see is the so-called semantic grounding with machine translation tools and AI, which may be around the corner. This means that the language solutions do not only work on the surface level, on the language surface level, but also try to interpret what's behind the message, as I said, between the lines. In humanities, the expectations are if you have the customer experience, user experience with flawless English that it produces, then you'll expect that the machines, that the systems actually produce flawless Czech, flawless Hungarian, flawless whatever. But this is, again, not the case. I get surprised each and every time I use ChatGPT, for example, that it returns answers in Czech, some, for example, that are grammatically incorrect. They really are. And it's not one phrase a day. I see it several times a day. I just did some prompting yesterday afternoon, and it actually, what happened was I got a sentence in combined Czech and English. The first half was in English, the second half was in Czech. And I am a regular ChatGPT user. I have a paid version. I pay really those $20 a month, and this is what I'm getting. I don't like it. I would love ChatGPT to be much better, to be professional and reliable. It's not. And I do pay for it, and I'm upset. In humanities, again, we had a case study, perhaps, or anecdote. We had a PhD examination or entrance examination with a student applying and defending her PhD project, and everybody in the panel had read the project, and we thought, this is ChatGPT generated stuff. So we confronted the student, the applicant, and saying, have you used artificial intelligence to generate this project? And she said yes. Could you do without? Could you work without AI today? That was her answer by using a question. And of course we said, yes, you can work without it. If you used it, you were supposed to give a statement to this effect saying, that's what that's the engine I used, that's the prompt I used, etc. Go ahead, but you must disclose it. So that was the expectations, and with the consequences. We'll get to it perhaps in more detail, but on a general level, I'd say what we can expect is, if we're shifting this task of rendering messages from one natural language to another, or translation, to a system, then people will feel that the quality is relatively high. The motivation to learn foreign languages will decrease. It may be the case already. My expectation or fear is if the readiness and motivation to learn foreign languages disappears, then we will have devices that actually render the words, but the question is if they render the meaning and if they render the message. More importantly, even with language acquisition, you know, all of you are multilingual, and you know when you have studied a foreign language, this was not a summer job. It takes a lifetime. And what you're acquiring with the foreign language, it's the notion about the culture. Now imagine a society, digital natives, who will be using a thing like that to communicate, and you have simultaneous interpreting applications in your mobiles already, where you talk to it in Czech and it translates immediately into German, for example. If this kind of a language barrier will have gone, we'll no longer learn foreign languages. We'll not learn about the culture of the other. And this will erect new barriers, paradoxically. By tearing down the linguistic barrier, we might see other barriers coming up, such as a cultural barrier. And I see this as a real threat. Also, general consequences could be the richness of language plateauing, or the fact that we might be losing on the richness of language, because generative AI, neural networks, they work with probability, statistics, and they just prime, they use what comes up as the most frequent phrase rendering for something. By that, the richness of language, target language, diminishes, and we could see a mediocre language coming out of the machines in the future. And if this takes over, then language itself, the target languages, will face a real problem. And in humanities, again, about the consequences, thank you very much for the presentations that we just heard before this panel. We could see that translation and translating is an incredibly complex thing to do. It's not just swapping words. It's about culture, it's about historical contexts, and also diplomacy in humanities. Sometimes you just can't say plainly the author states some nonsense and I'm presenting this otherwise, here is what I'm saying. You just can't say that. What you say is, oh, there's been some issues with the data collection or whatever. So there's diplomacy involved in humanities. My question is, do the machines deal with this diplomatic language well as well? Language of prompting in humanities. We have made in our institute some experiments how the generative AI behaves, responds to a prompt in Czech. How does it respond to a prompt in German? How does it in English, etc. And you get slightly different outcomes when prompting using different prompting languages. And I'll probably close with an interesting development in humanities and translation industry combined, perhaps. There are considerations that we might not use the path of translating texts, scientific or other, when we are authors ourselves. We may, you've been referring to it, we may want to arrive at an article in German and have it published in English as well, simultaneously. There's a tendency to actually avoid the translation step and actually publish in a multilingual way from the very beginning. So not generate a text in German and have it translated into English by machine translation, but to generate a bilingual document from scratch. So avoid the translation step. The assumption here is, again, that what you get is two different versions of an article. So also in terms of content, not only in terms of languages or language version, but also content-wise. So we have to experiment with that.
May I really ask a question? I didn't quite understand the latter thing, but there's something else I'd like to talk to. You said, okay, given we have these technologies, fewer people will strive to learn languages because it's hard to learn languages. And I think this is quite true. If you have a good translation technology, and maybe one day we can even like speak into our phone and then there's a dolmetscher in there and things like that, we don't really need to learn languages anymore. And I think this will happen. We will learn less languages. Learning language will become a sport, a sign of fine culture, like learning piano, but not a necessity anymore as now. However, I believe the consequences of this are not as grave as you say, because you said, for example, with learning language, I also acquire knowledge of other cultures and I engage with other cultures. If I stop learning languages, I stop doing that. But I'd say, because we have these translation technologies, it's also much easier for me to engage with other cultures because I can consume all the documents or products, linguistic products of other cultures, which otherwise would be just not understandable for me. And let me support this with a little bit of anecdotal evidence. I know anecdotal evidence is very, very poor thing you can have, but of course, for the sake of the discussion. I have a very distant relative who lives in Japan, and basically he's Japanese. And if he posts something on Facebook, it's always Japanese. I wouldn't be able to understand what was going on if there wasn't this nice translator button where I can translate the post and then I know what's going on in his family and all. So it helps me to keep in touch and to even get a little bit knowledge of Japanese culture, which otherwise I wouldn't become acquainted with. And another anecdote is I used to have Netflix for quite some time until I decided I waste too much time with it. But when I had it, I found it very interesting to be able to watch television series which were produced in other countries and for other countries. I remember like a few years ago, I watched an Israeli television series, Stiesel, which played in the Orthodox Jewish milieu, a milieu which I absolutely don't know anything about at all. And that was very interesting. And I was able to watch it because they had English or German subtitles. I don't know which of these. And most likely automatically generated. Well, now I think the series also run on Arte or something, but back then I wouldn't even have come across it in German television or English television. I think this is also a benefit of technology and also of translation technology making this possible. And also I appreciate the ability, if I look into a French newspaper, my French is pretty bad, I know a bit of French, but it's pretty bad, to click in my browser a button and then get a translated version so it can read a full article. So really, I mean, we all know about the internet and the bubbles that evolve and all things, so there are different tendencies, but I believe that translation technology also enables us to engage with other cultures in a way which we couldn't otherwise, and which even by learning languages, we couldn't, because you can learn, how many languages can you learn? I mean, if you're good at languages, you can learn half a dozen in your life, and maybe there are some people who know 10 or 12 languages. But with translation technology, you can have at least all the languages which are well translated. And I now learned that Czech, unfortunately, is not so well translated. And I also must admit, because I was talking about secondary literature, that I often translate things in French or Portuguese into English because I feel more safe that the thing will do it right. But I never really made the comparison. But I wanted to ask you the question, because what you have been just telling us was also something I read in your paper. And are you still so pessimistic about these adverse cultural effects or adverse effects regarding the engagement with other cultures as a consequence of these technologies?
Well, I think it's still plain for me. see that when engaging with other people, you really need to know how the words that you're using, how they will be received. If you're not offending the other partner in the discussion. There are so many charged expressions, there's so many difficult words. We have learned some kind of diplomatic language in English probably, but there can so much can go wrong when you're addressing a person inadequately. And I think if we're using an instant translator, these applications are not interpreters. These are simultaneous translation applications for the discussion discourse. If we use that, I think we'll still know that it's imperfect, and we'll be able to say, oh, this is nonsense. We hope that the speaker did not mean that to say that, but it's a barrier in itself. I mean, the application creates yet another barrier. This mechanical barrier is just think of a situation, for example, in a hospital or in a prison or police situation where you have skilled interpreters, and the nurse or the police person will talk to the partner in the discussion through an application like that. It's also depersonalized, and so much gets verloren. So much
it's
lost in translation. Even though you can simulate a person's voice today with the technology, you never can simulate what they actually want to get across, the point they want to make. So it will always, as long as we're lacking the semantic grounding, it will always just scratch the surface and just translate the words.
I agree with you, or at least to so far, that if you acquire language, you certainly get a much deeper understanding of another culture than with just reading, translated material. I would agree. But still, I would say that translation technology doesn't have this bad consequence of creating barriers between cultures. I even think you said it in this very sharp form, because I think this is a little bit exaggerated, and there's still, again, as I remarked, the opposite tendency that on other levels, the translation technology brings other cultures nearer to you or makes them accessible to you. But I also would like to ask another question, or something I read in your paper, which, okay, you wrote it in 2016, and obviously the technology wasn't as good because you seem to assume that the language that is produced by these machines is a relatively simple, stylized, or poor language. And you expressed some worries about the proliferation of language on this poor level. Would you still agree to that? Because my impression is, when I use DeepL today, the language, ChatGPT for that matter, the language quality is perfectly fine in German and in English. That's what I can judge on. With ChatGPT, the problem is that the facts are sometimes wrong, they hallucinate. But if I just talk about translations, I get perfectly fine language. It's the content I sometimes have to worry about. However, I have to really worry about the content if I want to use ChatGPT to write a paper for me. I hardly need to worry if I just use it for translation. At least that's my experience, that I hardly ever had cases of actual hallucination when something was translated. There were sometimes errors, sometimes logical errors were introduced into a text, and I know convoluted or long sentences are a bit difficult. But I don't have hallucinations. So this means, at least in the field of language technology, I don't think that the level of language that is produced is poorer than the level of language that humans would produce, or that even a trained translator would produce. The translation might be very more accurate, but the niveau of the language is now almost perfect.
Interesting point. I would still maintain, and there's research actually suggesting that this consequence is there with machine translation, at least the neural machine translation. So the classic machine translation engines that due to the probabilistic engines or the methodology that it uses, it really uses the phrases that come up in the corpus the most frequently. So it really primes, it really gives priority to the most frequently used phrases. And by that token, you can expect the language to really use a relatively narrow layer of linguistic material, because there will always be this kind of the most frequent phrase in Czech that the machine will use, unless, and here's the point, perhaps a development since 2016-17, unless you use generative AI for that purpose and you prompt the thing to actually use variable language or to try and formulate things other than what comes up with the first hit. And this, of course, this is possible. Very interestingly, in our institute with students, we do experiments with prompting ChatGPT, for example, and we try to shift the stylistic level. We try to prompt the machine saying, you're now translating a newspaper article, give me some points about what's important about article translation. You're now translating a scientific article, research paper, give me a list of what you'll focus on, etc. So you can shift those stylistic levels today, and you can also prompt it to use variable language. Where, although I think a typical user will not think about that, a typical user will just give what we refer to as the one-shot prompt, saying translate the following from German into Czech. But it's very interesting to experiment with the prompts. Another experiment we did in the classroom, for example, 20 people in the classroom, everybody, I sent out a specific prompt, everybody using exactly the same prompt, everybody using exactly the same original text in English. So we had 20 times using the same engine under ChatGPT, translated it 20 times at one moment in time, and we got 20 different, it was 3 paragraphs long, 20 different versions. I really had ChatGPT compare the versions, and really there was not 2 identical, and it was only 3 paragraphs long. Whereas if you use NMT, the neural machine translation, DeepL, for example, the translations, even though you have 20 users, they will be much more similar. So the diffusion is there.
If I might interject with a question maybe here, because of just one more thing, that there are 20 different translations. Not necessarily means that there are bad translations. So that's we should keep in mind. But to focus again on scientific text, maybe 2 sets of questions. The one thing is, both basically assume that we may maybe ascribe things that we worry about to these machine translations that are maybe independent from it. And if you look at the Czech-German context in particular, I think it's a very valuable thing to look at this context with this historical background. So and go from a problem there. You said that the bilingualism and the understanding of cultures is receding, basically. But we could argue that this is happening for a long time already, before the arrival of ChatGPT and DeepL, and then bilingualism, as we know it from the late 19th century, isn't there anymore. Same form. So, and we could also say that maybe it's not only that thing. I mean, if 30 years ago, if we had this conference, most German scholars would arrive in Prague and expect to speak German and be understood, and maybe it's a good thing that we have this additional level, and that's so the loss of this bilingual capacity, I would say, is certainly a loss, but it also is we have maybe gained something, and also for sure it's not only a problem of machine translation. So that's the first question. Maybe the second question, more maybe to Eka Anuel, is I think well, of course you can worry about formalized language and then too simple language. And I think it's has merit to worry about that. But again, I would ask, is that the problem of science during the last 20 years in general, maybe, that we have received or are very content with very formulaic scientific articles, or the way we formulate articles, and then of course that's basically the basis on which these machines or the machine translation can be successful, because already we have a level of simplified scientific language that is accepted. But again, it's something that we describe maybe with machine translations, but it is a different problem. And maybe it's in your case, maybe we can talk more about that. Maybe it's in analytical philosophy. You can be more successful with these kind of translation, because the language is maybe more formalized. It's just.
You're right. Regarding the latter point, you're absolutely right. The language is there, very formulaic, and it's an easy target, either for human or machine translation. Okay. But there was a first question first.
Yeah, loss and or gain in those circumstances. I totally agree that there is so much potential with the automated solutions, of course. On the other hand, with the cultural background, if a machine really translates for you that in Germany you have a CDU, you have a CSU political party, that's great to see on paper or hear in a synthetic voice, but it's so charged. There's so much behind it. There's so much behind the CSU political party. So just translating the words doesn't do the job itself. You really need to see and what's behind it, and you don't to be able to communicate with people in other countries. You have to become a political scientist to actually know what CSU or CDU, the political parties are. Now you're grasping that as part of your language training, if you're interested in German. But if this disappears, you will have to have real experts on German politics and social life to be able to communicate across cultural barriers. So we'll probably be losing this wealth in the process of automation, on the one hand. On the other, I definitely agree. If it allows us, if the solutions are reliable enough that we can translate anything from the past, and this will be made available to us, that's a great thing. And I would definitely looking forward to that moment. We're not there yet. It's not reliable. Just I have a table to share, or just I don't think we have. Yeah, if the time is there. Sorry. Sure. Yeah. Yes.
No, we need my.
No, we're good. We have the share screen here. This is just a part of a recent publication here. And in the publication, it's a very basic text on language technologies, and I am trying to make the point that every user of language technologies should be aware that it really is prone to making mistakes. And these are examples translations made recently by DeepL, for example. I have the English-Czech language pair. The first example, you received a response from Mrs. XY the same day to apologize and advise, which means in English, the response is an apology. Whereas into Czech, it was translated, you should apologize as the receiver. Or DeepL is prone to making errors, mistakes in numbers. Look at example number 2. That's real example. So will you entrust a scientific paper to an engine like that? Arbeitgeberbonus, number 3, was translated as a bonus for employers, whereas Arbeitgeberbonus obviously means the bonuses that the employee is getting. So an opposite meaning. And issues number 6, for example, bias or gender issues, the head of the government took the floor, slova se ujal předseda vlády, meaning the prime minister he, whereas it could, in reality, it was a she. Or the president, Slovak president at the time when it was Ms. Čaputová, so it was a she. Slova se ujal slovenský prezident, he in the translation. So there's so many issues with the background. So far, the machines do not grasp that. They don't have semantic grounding, but we're moving toward a time that they will have that.
May I ask a question? How many errors of this type of mistake occur per page or per 10 pages? Do you have an estimate? Well, obviously too many to please you.
These substantial errors appear every second page or so.
Okay.
I do translations. I still do some translations, and I do change the wording in about 75% of the renderings. I do the post editing.
Okay.
So I have it translated by Google Translate or DeepL, and I change 75%. Only 25% I can leave as is.
Oh, I see. But that's German, Czech, or
yes, that's German, Czech.
Yeah. Okay.
We already have a comment, I think, from the audience. So if you allow, I would. Audience, because
thanks a lot for the discussion. In the first part, there were 2 things that was two assumptions, hidden assumptions that surprised me a bit. One of them is that the normal situation is that people are first monolingual and then become multilingual by learning foreign languages. And the second one is that there is a clear distinction between language and dialect. So if there is a problem that people are monolingual with language technology, then the millions of migrants who are from birth or from childhood bilingual by nature, no, not by nature, but by upbringing, it will then save us. Not to talk about people in Western Africa who tend to be trilingual also from childhood on. And this is not foreign languages, these are all native languages in many cases. So that's one of the assumptions. I just wonder if that has any impact on the discussion. And the second one is, growing up as a Norwegian, I already know 3 languages because Swedish and Danish are close enough. So if you do a little bit of effort, and you have similar situations between Italian and Spanish, especially some Italian dialects, to some extent Italian, Romanian, between many Slavonic languages, and so on. So the question is, learning a foreign language can be to sit down and spend years of actually learning a foreign language. But learning a foreign language can also mean that you take 2-3 weeks to actually understand the Danish pronunciation, which is a bit complex because there are more than 20 vowels. But it's not hard for a Norwegian or a Swede to learn that. And again, I've been in Italian language class with Spanish people, and for them to learn Italian and for me to learn Italian cannot be compared because they already have more than 50% of the lexicon and major parts of the grammar. I cannot really write well Swedish. So for these kind of things, but if you talk about communication and reading, so I just wondered if you would comment on these 2 things.
I think these are specific examples, and it's great if a person is more than monolingual. That's it. I mean, with every language that you acquire, no matter how, your horizons widen. So it's a great thing. if it's in the family, even better, because you know all the nuances from the very beginning. And I think automated systems will struggle with the nuances, or with yourself as user, or myself as user, I will not be able to grasp the nuances. But if there's this background, multilingual, great.
Well, I really have no comments or questions.
I'm just thinking about, now we are discussing the difference between a professional translation and the AI translation. And I cannot help but to think about kind of the global south and education issues, where a lot of things just are not available to people in different countries. And maybe some universities in like South American states don't even have a big university library with all the works of specific like stuff that they want to study. I don't know, Max Weber or Ludwig Wittgenstein or anything that are big topics in certain disciplines, but they just cannot have all the material available. And we often talk about that in the discussion about open access. And when we publish open access as privileged Europeans, that we not only give access to that material to other privileged Europeans, but also to people in the global south who maybe do not have access to that material yet. And I also think that automated translation is in the same vein, where those people can then access maybe a German library about Max Weber, but they maybe have not good enough German to read that in the original open access version, but they can then plug that into an automated translator and get an automatic translation. And my question would be, if you think the issues about not the translation of being nuanced or good enough would outweigh in the risks those advantages that they may pose in making material available, like at a base level, generally.
Wow, I mean, that's a great point. I think we have to distinguish the purpose, and I think the response is already inherent in your question. If we are happy with the good enough quality, it can be an entry point, an entry gate. I can get interested into this or that author and learn the language just because I was fascinated by some of the initial thoughts I was able to grasp. And I know of people who actually learned, for example, because they wanted to understand better a philosopher, a German philosopher. They read the philosopher in Czech translation, in great translation into Czech, made really by a team of people over several years. So this is like this. And they were so fascinated by the thoughts that they actually wanted to learn German because they wanted to experience the language. So in this sense, the multilingual, the automated solution would be a great entry point. With the remark that it will never work with Wittgenstein, for example.
I know that boy, I figured.
So yes, it's about the purpose.
Let me add one remark, because I think that's a very fine example. If you compare human translator with machines, for the time being, the human translator always wins. It's only there are so many situations that we only have the choice between not at all or good enough. And now with good enough being almost everywhere, like I think it's really a game, because there's so many situations where we now have a translation where we wouldn't have any at all because we couldn't pay human translators doing all these things.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is a strong point, or at least for my technological optimism.
I just want to, my last point would be, I am not against those solutions. And as I said, I would be really happy to have them work flawlessly. And we're working with students, we're trying to see what works better, what engine to use in what circumstances. So the type of the work of the translator for the future will change, but you still need the expert to say, use Google Translate in here, use DeepL there, feed in terminology this way, etc.
I will maybe ask. take up one of the last comment, maybe, so one else. One of the other points that you made, I think it's very persuasive to point out this 5-year discourse, and I think it's a very important observation because it shows us that we have using this technology and managing the expectations come with this technology. We have, it seems to me, get used to a very positivist way of describing things. So it's always gets better. It's measurable, but it gets better. You can measure a good translation, for example. Can measure a good, I don't know, semantic enrichment with texts or something like that, which we should do, obviously. There are measures for that. But still, at the same time, that was my point before, that also something that Lucia said in her talk, that if we have different translations, none of them is better than the other. So we have 20 different translators. They can all of them are somehow working if recipients are there. And so the question would be, wouldn't it be wise maybe to challenge our own expectations about these machine translations, in that we shouldn't put them in such a positivist outlook that there will be a perfect solution, because the way we are talking right now, or at least these companies obviously talking about it right now, is that we are getting closer to this solution. And you pointed out that it's a 5-year discourse, but so would say the underlying problem is that we assume that there is a measurable final point to these technologies. So the question is, are we ascribing something to these technologies? That's maybe not the problem of these technologies, but our expectations.
Yes, I definitely agree. It's about managing expectations, and I witnessed a very nice discussion with an AI expert who said it's just a matter of technological development, addressing translators and saying, "You fools, how can you just be sure that you won't be replaced by humans in whatever time?" It's just a matter of the computational capacity. If you just look back at the end of World War II, all NATO's computational capacity is comparable. It was not NATO at that time, but the Western Allies' computational capacity was comparable to your today's Christmas greeting card that plays happy whatever. So it improves year by year. You have this great gain in computational power. And it's just a matter of time that the machines will acquire the semantic understanding and whatever. They will be able to translate, they will be able to interpret. And I think it's the same logic behind it. So there's a technological development. It's just a matter of feeding enough data into a system that is computationally capable enough, and that's it. Whereas I think the human touch is in interpreting the language, and I've been involved with hermeneutics as well. And you know, there's several types of hermeneutics. You have the biblical hermeneutics, you have the legal hermeneutics, and other. And this is an art. This is an art of interpreting messages. So throw at me whatever computational power there will be, throw at me billions of words. I still don't think you will be able to mimic the hermeneutic interpretation capability of a human brain. So I'd agree that it's a way of looking at the development with the optimists saying we'll have the capacity and we'll solve all the problems. Whereas I think that the very nuances will need to be interpreted with the mind that was behind the creation step. And if the texts were created by humans, only humans in the end will be able to interpret those. The very nuanced problems and the very nuanced between the lines type of messages.
Well, I won't say anything, it's not such a nice clothing word.
After expecting you to add a positive.
When I could say, there was a time when people said computers will never play chess as well as humans, or where computers will never be able to recognize human faces because it's such a human facility, and now they do. But I reckon language is much more complicated, and we cannot also not say because of these examples for any problems, well, it's just a matter of time until computers will solve it. Until it is solved, we do not know if it's solvable by computers. So your position may turn out to be right or wrong in 20 years. We cannot say yet.
So thank you both of you.